Hello, this is Alan Kittinger, and this is my case study presentation for SPED 6010. I did my case study on a student with Down syndrome, and this is what I found. The presentation layout will consist of the case study itself of the student, as well as an analysis of her disability, followed by the parent's perspective, how they perceive and live with their child and their child's disability, and how the parent has been a part of their child's education, um, followed by a school perspective, which consisted of an interview with the student's second grade teacher, um, and how she was able to accommodate the student, as well as things that she hopes will happen for the student in future classrooms. Some accommodations and modifications for the student based on the parent and teacher's perspectives, as well as different accommodations and modifications that are often associated with Down syndrome. And finally, some behavioral and academic strategies for this particular student as she moves forward in her education. And so for the case study, I looked at a young female student who will be called Alice for this presentation. She is currently 11 and in 6th grade. As previously stated, she has Down syndrome, and her mother is actually a teacher. Her mother did have her in class in 1st grade, but she is not the teacher I interviewed for the school perspective. So Down syndrome, if there are a lot of characteristics of Down syndrome, a lot are physical and are quite obvious at first glance of a person who has Down syndrome. A lot of common physical characteristics are prevalent in many individuals with Down syndrome, but not universally applicable. These include maybe a small nose, possibly a small mouth with a tongue sticking out, a flat back of the head, broad hands and short fingers, and possibly a below average weight and length at birth. So a lot of these characteristics, again, are fairly obvious, and many of these individuals are identified at birth. There is a delayed development to some degree in every individual with Down syndrome, maybe a slower acquisition of motor skills or speaking, and 1 out of 10 individuals with Down syndrome may also have an autism spectrum disorder or attention deficit hyperdisorder, more commonly known as ADHD. Some common health issues, aside from physical and mental characteristics of Down syndrome, heart and bowel problems are common, as well as hearing and vision issues and an increased risk of infections. So all of these characteristics, especially the health concerns, especially in young children at birth and early years, can be quite concerning to the families and parents. So from the parent perspective, I spoke with Alice's mother, and she gave her perspective purely as a mother, with a little input on the teacher side, because as previously stated, she did have her own daughter in class in 1st grade, and then Alice continued through 5th grade at the same school where her mother teaches. So she was identified at birth with early interventions starting at 6 weeks old, and that consisted of 2 days a week until she was 3 years old. A physical therapist came in and worked on her muscles and coordination through games and exercises, just working with her muscles and getting everything kind of figured out that way. Her mother felt that her early intervention was appropriate and successful. She started out in a preschool with nonverbal peers, but her mother felt that she should be in a regular classroom with students who were in the general education and who spoke and interacted with each other, because she felt that in a nonverbal classroom, um, her daughter's social and other developments could progress at an even slower rate than is normally associated with Down syndrome due to lack of verbal and social interaction. So she requested a regular preschool with an aide and 5 days of speech therapy each week, and she did receive that. Again, as a teacher, she was possibly slightly more aware of things that she could request for her daughter in the school setting. Again, that's why she was able to request a regular preschool instead of one with nonverbal peers. But she did say that she felt that their choices and possibilities were made clear to her as a parent, and they weren't just assumed because she was a teacher. So the school system in which she's working, she does feel has adequate communication between the school system and the parents. Um, Further accommodations at school for Alice. She continued to be in regular classrooms through fifth grade with pull-out services, speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, all of these continuing. She is now currently in middle school, and she has been moved into a comprehensive development classroom, or CDC for short. So she is no longer in the regular classroom, which was a hard decision for her mother. She said that she would rather that Alice have stayed in regular classrooms, but this is what she felt was best for her daughter, to be in a more focused classroom where the teachers could focus more on her and have kind of a smaller classroom and more educational things that were appropriate for her developmental level. She feels that both schools, elementary and middle school, that her daughter has attended, the schools and the teachers themselves understand her daughter and her needs, and she says she just wants her daughter to have normal expectations and be challenged as she goes forward. Um, I actually do know uh, this student and her mother. Um, I've met them, I've talked with them, I've known them for a few years, working in the same school system myself. And her daughter does have an amazing personality. She's definitely not reclusive of any sort. She hasn't, shied away. And I think being in the general education classroom has helped that. She has friends and peers who interact with her. The other students love her, love talking to her and playing with her. So I feel that has contributed to a very positive development in her life. Um, Future goals that her mother has for her would be to work a simple job. She feels that with some focused training and skill acquiring, that Alice could hold a simple job, just maybe a few hours a day, just to um, use requisite skills to perform a job, to have a bank account, to be able to have and manage money. Um, and she wants teachers and people to know that she is not as different as she seems. She's now an 11-year-old girl. She likes to have friends. She likes to talk. She likes to hang out. She likes to run around. She can be quite mischievous. Her mother said she likes to kind of have fun with her friends and her teachers, maybe be a little sly every now and then. So she says that Alice is unique and has a lot to give, and that is very true. She is quite a character. Now, from the school perspective, her second grade teacher, as was previously stated, Carmen Kittinger, she is taught first and second grade and was a reading interventionist at her current school since 2011. And she had Alice in second grade from 2013 to 2014. Mrs. Kittinger's classroom, just on a general basis, her classroom management skills are exemplary. She gives rewards and consequences consistently. She makes sure that all of her students know her expectations in the classroom, in the hallway, at recess, lunch. She is very not strict, not overly strict, but she has a good management system, and the kids do respect her. She teaches all of her students to greet adults that enter the classroom. Many of her colleagues have commented whenever they walk in the classroom, Mrs. Kittinger will say hi to that adult, and then 15 to 20 kids will also all say hi. They'll stop whatever they're doing to say hi. So she does have a good um, repetition skill management there. One fun activity she has with them when they make good ideas or comments or additions to the lesson is to kiss their brain, which consists of kissing their hand and moving their hand to their head. And, she's very engaging. She's very encouraging of creative thinking. Oftentimes in elementary school, I feel that teachers, sometimes they feel they need to get this thing accomplished and this goal accomplished, and they're very inside the box because they want to get things accomplished. And she does get things accomplished, but also encourages thinking outside that box. And that does apply to all of her students, regardless of um, development level, social interaction level, um, mental development level. This is a normal day in her classroom. So working with Alice in particular, Mrs. Kittinger participated in regular IEP meetings. She helped to set goals for Alice, making sure they were realistic and obtainable, making the team aware of daily struggles and successes. Often during IEP meetings, the classroom teacher, especially whenever it's a special needs student in the regular classroom, the everyday classroom teacher has the most up-to-date information. They see the students on a regular basis. They know what a normal day is for a student, what an exceptional day is, what a really bad day is for a student. They're the ones who know. So I feel it's important that they're the ones kind of maybe leading the way a little bit in IEP meetings to set goals, and again, as Mrs. Kittinger stated, letting the team know of daily struggles and successes, because both good and bad things are always important. As she was in second grade, um, she accommodated Alice's mental development by giving kindergarten work until Alice could master that, and then moved on from there. This helped her develop and have success while not giving her things that were beyond her comprehension, and that which would possibly cause her to just check out mentally and be done with it and get frustrated. Um, Throughout elementary school, Alice had a full-time aide who went with her to all of her classes and assisted her during whole group instruction to have some focused instruction to explain things and help explain the work. Um, Mrs. Kittinger had high expectations for Alice and gave her assignments of a challenge level that would cause her to think and have to work for it, but also so she could feel successful upon completion. The assignments weren't so simple that she could just breeze through them and be done. It was something that challenged her and made her think, but allowed her to say, "Hey, I did that." In the classroom, Alice is, as I said earlier, well accepted by the other students. Mrs. Kittinger would often group the students together and would sometimes place Alice with higher achieving students because they would be able to help her academically and socially. They'd be able to do their work and be able to help Alice complete her work. As far as behavior management, Alice was subject to all the rules of the regular classroom. There were no exceptions. She understands most things, and Mrs. Kittinger, held her to the same standards as the other kids, behavior-wise. There were times when she would make deliberate bad choices, and her teacher, Mrs. Kittinger, knew that these choices were deliberate. She chose to do them, and those were punished with the normal punishment of walking laps around the track at recess instead of playing. There were times on the other side, however, where she may have done something which was kind of mischievous and just kind of wanted to prank a friend, wasn't necessarily meaning to be overly um, bad behavior. And instead of having her walk laugh, Miss Kittinger would talk to Alice, explain to her um, why it was wrong, what she could have done better. And on Alice had, or still has probably, good days and bad days. And on bad days, if she's kind of moody or gloomy, then she could be very, very stubborn and just wouldn't want to do much of anything. And Mrs. Kittinger would keep her from computers or game center time whenever the kids had those options. And she didn't understand that she was being punished for bad behavior. And normally, by the end of the day, her attitude would be reversed. And the punishment would have had its full effect. Some challenges that Ms. Kittinger felt um, affected her in the classroom was that whole group instruction time was more difficult. Alice would not benefit from whole group instruction, even with her aide being there next to her. It's just harder for her to take that in. Other kids are responding, and her teacher is talking, and her aide is trying to talk to her and kind of clue her into what's happening. So she feels that Alice didn't fully benefit from whole group instruction. And then on the flip side of that, whenever she would go over to work with Alice one-on-one, this particular year she had 21 students in class and 20 other second graders. Whenever the teacher is focusing one-on-one on a student, can tend to get a little rowdy in the background. So it was challenging both ways. If given the option, Miss Kittinger would have liked more time with Alice, but with 21 students, it was simply unrealistic, and she had to do what she could in whole group and then some one-on-one instruction whenever she could. Future goals that Ms. Kittinger has for Alice. She feels that her IEP is appropriate. The goals set forth and the accommodations are what Alice needs, but the IEP just doesn't take the teacher's other responsibilities into account. The IEP is a little overloaded for a teacher managing 15 to 20 other students. Alice is definitely the minority in whichever classroom she goes into, and she needs that focused instruction, which it's hard to get from a teacher in the general education classroom. For future teachers, Mrs. Kittinger, kind of along the same lines as Alice's mother, wants her future teachers to know that Alice has a great personality. She's outgoing. She likes to joke and tease and have fun. And on the gloomy days where she might be a little more stubborn or upset or just kind of angry feeling, she just needs a little bit of patience and love, and that'll go a long way. Mrs. Kittinger's goal for Alice aligns with that of the mother, that she would learn a trade, get a job, and be able to function in society with minimal assistance. Um, so possibly someone coming in a few days a week to check in on her, or something of that nature, possibly still living at home, but having a job and a bank account and being able to be out and about on her own. Some general accommodations for students with Down syndrome, and a lot of these apply to Alice in particular, would be to have high expectations. Just because they don't seem to get everything at the same pace as the other students doesn't mean they can't understand something. So as a teacher of a student with Down syndrome, it's good to hold them to high expectations. Don't lower the bar just because you think they can't reach as high as everybody else. Model the task and give multiple opportunities for success. So don't just tell them what to do and let them go to it. Show them many times how it's done. Allow adequate response time for questions. Some individuals with Down syndrome are nonverbal. They may have different signs, or they can write things as a response. Some might be slightly verbal and just take time to respond or to think about something before answering. So give them time to respond. Break tasks into smaller steps. Don't name off 6 or 7 items and say, do this in that order. Name 1 or 2 things, let them accomplish that. Give them the next step. Just break it down into smaller steps. Be clear about stopping one activity and starting the next. Make sure they know that we're done doing this and you're starting this next activity. And present few stimuli at a time. That's similar to breaking tasks into smaller steps. Just make sure they know that you're just doing this right now, then this right here. Make sure they don't get overwhelmed by too many things at one time. Some modifications. Don't grade every question of a test. If they take the test, if they answer everything, or if they don't grade every question because they may not have understood everything clearly. Take that into account. If they're in the general education classroom, it's usually a good idea to have a full-time aide unless they are fairly high functioning with Down syndrome. A reward and consequence system is good, especially with the developmental delay, possibly some misunderstandings of good and bad behavior. A repetitive reward and consequence system is beneficial. And make time for one-on-one instruction. It is hard with a classroom of other students, but especially as the students get older in the older grades and the teacher can consistently rely on the other students to do their work on their own, then it's easier to get that one-on-one time with the student with Down syndrome. And then specifically some modifications for Alice. Material that's not as current as that of her peers, like Mrs. Kittinger did. She gave her kindergarten material in the 2nd grade. As she moves up in grades, if she stays in the CDC classroom, that will continue. Keep her accountable for her actions. Don't dismiss inappropriate behavior as a result of Down. She does know right from wrong. And she sometimes gets things a little confused, but is capable of making good and bad decisions. Challenge her and give her material that will allow her to feel success. So don't give her easy things, but stuff that gives her a sense of accomplishment when she's finished. Put her in peer groups with students that can help her on assignments, so higher achieving students in the general classroom, and keep her engaged. Don't just set her in the back and say she has Down syndrome, she's not going to be able to do this, so I'm going to give her a coloring sheet. No, just give her work. Keep her engaged with the material. She is smart and she does want to come forward and achieve. So this has been my case study on a student with Down syndrome, and that is about all. And here's some resources.